dominate the gaming industry. It has actively influenced pop culture globally for decades, incited political crusades, and broken more sales records than any other product to come out of the entertainment industry as a whole. Yet, the architects behind the franchise virtually remain ghosts. Rockstar Games operates with a level of secrecy that rivals intelligence agencies, burying the glorious chaos of their creative process well away from the public eye. But 30 years of history cannot be completely hidden. So today, I'd like to welcome you to the entire behind-the-scenes history of Grand Theft Auto, unpacking everything from raw development hurdles and forgotten production archives to toxic internal wars, explosive public controversies, and the secrets you were never meant to discover. We're pulling back the curtain on what actually happened during the development of these games and how the series has evolved into what it is today. And to do that, we have to start right at the beginning.
Now, all the people in here are working on what DMA hopes will be its new blockbuster. It's a game called Grand Theft Auto. It's got to be finished by the end of June, so they're involved in some pretty hard work in here. It's all about a car chase through the streets of a fictional, probably American city. Here are some of the maps they've been working on.
Yeah, I remember playing this game, the first one when it came out, and I just didn't like top-down stuff, so I remember playing it. I want to say like a demo on PlayStation, and I remember like, damn, this is a good concept, but this top-down shit I don't fuck with. So like the first two Grand Theft Autos, like I just kind of overlooked them. When it got to 3, I was like, oh no, we on to something. But the top-down shit was something I really ain't have a love for.
It's May 1996, and a small team of developers from Dundee, Scotland called DMA Design are hard at work on a brand new game called Grand Theft Auto, a game the world had never yet heard of. In fact, this old BBC Working Lunch episode where we got to see a little behind the scenes was the public's very first introduction to GTA, which is why Dave Kivlin, a prominent member of the development team who worked only on GTA 1, has to explain the basic concept of what they're building to journalist Rory Cellan-Jones, basically like a kindergartner. A top-down, open-world, action-adventure game where you play as a criminal, stealing cars, completing missions, and causing as much chaos as possible across 3 different cities. At the time, that idea alone was almost unheard of. Most games up until the mid-90s were very light-hearted, or had you playing the hero saving the day, a game that put you in the shoes of the villain, the anti-hero or criminal, whatever you want to call it, simply wasn't something mainstream games did. However, at this point, GTA 1 was still a huge work in progress, not dropping until roughly a year and a half after this Working Lunch episode aired. Just a handful of developers, most of them barely experienced, working out of a cramped studio with minimal resources, and really not much belief from anyone that what they were building would ever amount to anything. And yet, without knowing it, they were laying the foundation for a game that would become embedded in pop culture for decades to come, because many of the core features that would go on to define the franchise were born here, such as the simple concept of having the ability to steal any car you see on the street, wanted levels, the iconic wasted screen that would become a staple of the series, and an in-game radio featuring multiple stations across different genres of music. Although rather than licensing popular songs, at first every track was composed entirely in-house by their own music department. But as impressive as it was, this small and inexperienced team was pulling all of this together. Even figuring out the direction they were heading with the game was a battle in itself. Originally, the game started life under the name Race and Chase, a cops and robbers game where you could play as either side. However, the team quickly came to a realization. As Gary Penn, the creative director of the game, later put it, nobody wanted to be the cop. It's just more fun to be bad. So they scrapped the police angle, went all in on the criminal side, and everything changed from there. But even with a clear direction, actually building the game was where the wheels really started to come off. For example, Gary Penn stated that the writers were driving the game one way while the level designers were driving it another, and they weren't meeting in the middle. So they'd end up with missions that made no sense in the context of the world they were being built in, and a game that didn't hold together. The milestones they had set to show the publishers things were moving forward were not being met, meaning at any point the whole thing could have been shut down completely. And as it turns out, that's exactly what the US publishers wanted to do.
A matter of months, we had the US, because we'd have conference calls every week, at least once a week with the US. They wanted to kill it every week, and I think this is amazing. Every week they wanted to kill this game, and we'd have to kind of argue to try and keep it going because we had some faith.
Every single week, the US publishers were pushing to have this game cancelled, and every single week the team had to fight to keep it alive. And it wasn't just the publishers they had to convince. Inside DMA Design itself, Grand Theft Auto was considered bottom of the pile, meaning nobody inside the studio wanted to work on it, so the team that did end up working on it had barely any experience between them. For example, Paul Farley, the game's level designer, revealed that only one person on the team had actually shipped a game before. Colin Anderson, who was the head of audio, admitted himself that he was just 22 and knew nothing. And yet, they all kept going despite everything working against them. But by the time they were approaching the finish line, the game was still barely holding together. It had reached the point where there were so many things still being crammed in that getting it out the door was the only way to stop it from collapsing under its own weight. And it really did go right down to the wire. The PlayStation version, which wouldn't actually release until 2 weeks after the PC version, still had to be locked and submitted for approval a full month before the PC build was even finished, which meant that the PC version itself was only completed about a week before it hit shop shelves. A week. So they were...
Ain't that some bullshit? Now we got to wait like a year for the PC version to come out. Like, this Grand Theft Auto 6 shit, I want this game so crazy, but I refuse to buy a PlayStation 5. Like, it's nipping at my heels. Like, I want to get one, but it's like, bro, I got top tier equipment as far as like PCs. Like, I don't want to play at 30 FPS on a fucking PS5. Like, come on, bro. Yeah, like, it's been 13 years. Put the shit out on PC first day.
Literally still fixing bugs and changing features right up until the absolute last minute. But against all odds, they got it done. November 28th, 1997, and Grand Theft Auto was out. However,
My fault, Chad. She's on real quick.
However, it wouldn't be a GTA release without some media controversy, and the publishers behind the game had a plan to make sure it created a firestorm.
Good shot, kid. I think you got him. Good shot, kid. I think you got him.
What unfolded was the result of one of the most calculated marketing campaigns in video game history. Because the controversy didn't happen by accident, the publishers behind Grand Theft Auto had secretly hired a publicist named Max Clifford, one of the most notorious PR men in the UK, with one specific goal: generate as much outrage as possible. And Max Clifford knew exactly what he was doing. He started leaking stories to British tabloids about the game's violent content months before it even came out, feeding exaggerated stories of hit-and-run missions and glorified crime sprees directly to right-wing politicians in Parliament, including Lord Campbell of Croy, who then stood up in the House of Lords and publicly condemned the game. And all of this was happening in May 1997, a whole 6 months before the game was even released. One of the co-creators of GTA 1 and 2, Mike Daly, flat out stated that Max Clifford made it all happen. He designed all the outcry, which pretty much guaranteed...
I think I'm gonna watch the first half of this on YouTube, Twitch, and Kick. I'm gonna do the second half on TikTok.
Guaranteed MPs would get involved. He told them his entire plan, exactly who he would target, and how those people targeted would react, and basically every word he said indeed came true. But the developers themselves didn't expect it to go anywhere near as far as it did. In fact, nobody on the team really understood the scale of the backlash at the time, because to them, they'd just been making a fun game. They weren't pulling all-nighters in that little studio in Dundee thinking they were making something dangerous. They
just watching this GTA documentary. I don't want to say in preparation for the game, but just going through the history of it all. I've been playing this game a long time, so I saw it today on YouTube and thought it was cool.
were just trying to finish the damn thing without it falling apart.
The controversy thing really got out of hand quite quickly, and it took everyone by surprise because we had been developing a game that was all about the fun, but Max Clifford was astonishing.
But whether they expected it or not, it worked. The people trying to ban the game were inadvertently doing all the marketing for it. And when GTA 1 finally came out in November 1997, it sold 500,000 copies within 3 months and 3 million copies within its first 3 years. Enter Rockstar Games. Following the success of Grand Theft Auto 1, BMG Interactive was acquired by Take-Two Interactive in 1998. Sam and Dan Houser, who had been executives at BMG, moved to New York, and by the end of that same year had established a brand new publishing label under Take-Two, Rockstar Games. And with Rockstar now at the helm, a sequel was already on the way.
Sound shaking, earthquaking.
Do you still have visual contact?
That's a negative. Suspect has abandoned vehicle.
DMA Design, the same team of people who'd fought tooth and nail to get the first game out the door, were back at their desks in Dundee, building Grand Theft Auto 2. The whole plan was to refine, polish and expand on their controversial formula, but overall it didn't find itself innovating that much. One developer even joked that it was basically moving the franchise only 5 minutes forward, something when you think about it you can rarely say about a mainline Grand Theft Auto title. Under development, the game was codenamed GBH, which in English and Welsh law stands for grievous bodily harm, and for a while they were actually considering calling the game A Stole a Motor, Scottish slang for stealing a car, but thankfully the team realised nobody outside of Scotland had any idea what that meant, so Grand Theft Auto 2 it was. And rather than basing the world on any real place, DMA Design built Anywhere City, a retro-futuristic metropolis set in an unspecified amount of time in the future. The design document for GTA 2 referenced the famous quote from the 80s TV show Max Headroom 20 minutes into the future as the creative direction. The visual inspiration drawn from some of the most iconic dystopian films made in the late 1900s, such as Blade Runner, Brazil and Akira. Promo material for the game described Anywhere City as a completely dysfunctional urban hell. And when it came to marketing the game, this sort of creative uniqueness carried over into how they were going to sell it to the world, commissioning a live-action short film that would go alongside the game's
release. I cannot stand top-down games. Like the first two Grand Theft Autos, I wanted to play them because the story behind them, the gameplay of it all is cool, but top-down just ain't my shit. Like even there's a game called Jackal that I want to play because it looked like my type of game, but it's top down. The Ruiner, all that shit. I like that type of shit, but it's top down.
Of live action, shot in New York City in 1999 with the World Trade Center visible in the background in some shots. There's no dialogue at all, just music and a simple story following the protagonist of the game called Claude Speed, a small-time crook who works his way through New York's criminal underworld, playing multiple gangs against each other for money and favors. He carjacks his way around the city, double-crosses everyone he works for, and by the end, one of the gangs he's betrayed catches up with him. Dan Houser actually wrote it himself, and the lead role of Claude Speed was played by Scott Malson, Jack Branning from EastEnders for anyone watching in the UK. Dan Houser even cast himself in it as an uncredited monk riding in a step van. It was easily the most ambitious piece of marketing for GTA they'd produced at that point. Though granted, GTA 2 was only the second game, but to this day it's still actually one of the bravest things they've ever done on that front. And more than that, it showed us Rockstar wasn't just trying to make games. They were building a brand that their fans could connect to, something that felt like it existed beyond the screen. The box art for this game also has this real raw energy about it, which might have something to do with the fact that they actually went to the top of the Empire State Building in New York, pointed a camera down at the street below and photographed a random yellow cab passing by. And
I'm gonna find you on Discord. We're gonna link for sure. I'm trying to build community. Like I'm just starting to stream and shit, but we definitely we're gonna link for sure, for sure. What's that? Flux 536. Got you.
that was the cover for Grand Theft Auto 2. However, despite Rockstar publishing the game, they didn't actually own the studio making it. DMA Design had been passed around like a hot potato, sold to British publisher Gremlin Interactive back in 1997. Then Gremlin was acquired by French publisher Infogrames in 1999 for £24 million, meaning the team building Grand Theft Auto were effectively owned by a company that had absolutely nothing to do with Rockstar. And throughout all of this, the people inside the studio were feeling it. According to former employees, the relationship between the team at DMA and the various owners above them was tense throughout this entire period. Staff were distrustful, unsettled, and increasingly at odds with the direction things were heading. Every ownership change had a real cost on the people sitting at those desks just trying to make great games. And it wasn't until September 1999, just 1 month before GTA 2 was released, that Take-Two finally bought DMA Design outright from Infogrames for £1, the price of a can of Coke, with the small caveat of taking on $11 million worth of debt. GTA 2 launched on October 22nd, 1999, and reviews were mixed. Despite over 1.2 million copies being shipped to stores worldwide at launch, expected to generate more than $33 million in revenue, it still wouldn't come close to GTA 1's overall lifetime sales. And amid all of the internal upheaval within DMA due to all the corporate acquisitions, Dave Jones, the co-founder of DMA Design and one of the original creative driving forces behind Grand Theft Auto, left the studio altogether following Take-Two Interactive's purchase of it. So by March 2000, the Dundee studio DMA Design, as the world had known it, was closed permanently. The remaining staff relocated
such a small
to Edinburgh.
studio,
With
that's
that,
crazy.
an era was over. But in this new studio, something was already taking shape that would change gaming forever, and the biggest chapter in the franchise's history was only just beginning. Following the mixed reception of GTA 2, a core team of just 23 people, mostly the same developers who had worked on Body Harvest and Space Station Silicon Valley, such as Leslie Benzies, Obi Vermey and Aaron Garbett, wanted to break free from the top-down perspective. You see, this now legendary trio had spent years working on the 3D side of DMA Design, specifically on the innovative N64 games Body Harvest, a third-person open-world action-adventure, and Space Station Silicon Valley, a creative 3D platformer where you inhabit the bodies of different animals to solve puzzles across a fallen space station. Working on those games exposed them to the power of a fully navigable 3D environment, experiencing firsthand how a 3D third-person camera could unlock visual storytelling, immersive physics, and a realistic sense of scale that flat pixels simply couldn't compete with. So having tasted that creative freedom, going backward to a top-down game felt counterintuitive. In fact, DMA support engineer Alan Jack described the original internal pitch for GTA 3 as explicitly combining Body Harvest's open-world exploration with Space Station Silicon Valley's level design. But the team didn't go straight into building GTA 3. The project they actually started with was something completely different. They began building a prototype for a Godzilla game, a destructible 3D city where you played as a massive kaiju monster that could tear through buildings, throw objects, and watch city blocks collapse in real time. However, it was never really meant to be an actual game. With some downtime between projects and access to a couple of Dreamcast dev kits, the team were essentially just playing around, seeing what was possible. Just a small group of developers experimenting with new hardware to see if they could build a convincing 3D city. And crucially, while the Edinburgh team were doing this, the remaining Dundee team was simultaneously working on an entirely separate GTA project of their own, codenamed Grand Theft Auto 2.5, a top-down isometric 3D game set in Miami. Two different teams, two completely different visions for the future of the franchise, running simultaneously. And the last thing the Edinburgh team wanted was to cause internal conflict by openly developing a 3D successor, while the other team were hard at work on their own version. One developer described it as not wanting to cause a bloodbath. So they kept it quiet, kept it under the Godzilla label, and let the work speak for itself. As Obi Vermey later recalled, the team were very deliberate about staying under the radar until they had something concrete to show. But what they ended up building was something truly astonishing for its time. A fully navigable 3D city filled with moving vehicles, pedestrians walking the streets, and buildings lining every block. And when Sam Houser saw it, even in its earliest, most broken state, he knew immediately this was exactly what he'd been waiting for. In his own words, it was mind-blowing. I was like, oh man, if we do this in proper 3D, it's going to be insane. Dan Houser's reaction was slightly different, stating, "What did I think when I first saw it? Well, to begin with, I had the natural reaction of, what is Sam talking about? The code would literally run for 10 seconds and crash. But when you started playing, you understood the magic." And Aaron Garbett, the art director who had helped build the prototype, later summed up the team's mindset perfectly. "We were young and arrogant and made a conscious decision to redirect the project to be GTA. We knew that we could do it. The prototype did exactly what it needed to do, and Sam, who'd always wanted to take GTA into 3D, gave the green light immediately. Take-Two chose Edinburgh and the full 3D version over the Miami 2.5 project, which was quietly cancelled when the Dundee studio closed in March 2000, though that setting wouldn't stay buried for long. And so, from August 1999, 23 people in a studio in Edinburgh got to work. What followed was 27 months of building something the games industry had never seen before. The first major decision was the platform. The prototype had been built on Dreamcast dev kits, but 4 months into development, the team made the call to switch to PlayStation 2. The Dreamcast simply wasn't commercially viable.
Unpopular opinion. Dreamcast might have been the most elite console during that generation. And I had a PS2, but my brother-in-law had a Dreamcast, and I remember like going over to his house and my sister's house playing his Dreamcast. And that's like I've been playing 2K since Dreamcast came out. So like when AI was on the front of 2K every year. And I had never gone back to like live after that. So I remember like all my friends were still playing live, but I was stuck on Dreamcast. Dreamcast was before its time. PS2, I ain't gonna lie, this PS2 look good as fuck though. That like amp style, the black and blue, love that whole colorway. I got that like the first year it came out for Christmas, but I don't think the Dreamcast get enough love. In my opinion, Dreamcast was like on the graphical side and like just kind of like elegant. It just had a more elite feel than the PS2 or the Xbox to me. Unpopular opinion.
Viable. Obi Vermai described it as a genuinely disappointing decision. The team loved the Dreamcast, but business was business. From day one, the technical challenges were unlike anything the team had faced before. One of the biggest problems they ran into was the streaming. The PS2 only had 32 megabytes of memory, enough for just a couple of city blocks around the player at any one time. But the total assets that made up Liberty City came to around 130 megabytes, nearly 4 times what the console could hold at once. So as the player moved through the city, new graphics had to be constantly loaded from the DVD, but the DVD drive was painfully slow, causing buildings to be completely invisible until they suddenly popped into view right in front of you. So the team got creative. They deliberately slowed the player's movement speed down to give the city more time to load. Portland Island originally had a long straight road running all the way down it, but that let players drive too fast and the streaming couldn't keep up. So they changed the road layout entirely to slow players down and even slightly increased the air resistance on vehicles in certain areas. The city itself went through a significant creative overhaul during development. Dan Houser originally described the early version of Liberty City as a generic hybrid, a blend of Chicago, Pittsburgh, Detroit, New York, and Philadelphia, all rolled into one. But as the team actually started building missions and stories within it, they realized that basing it more firmly on a single real city gave them so much more to say about it. So they redesigned Liberty City to be much more closely modeled on New York. Portland representing Brooklyn, Staunton Island representing Manhattan, and Shoreside Vale representing parts of New Jersey and Staten Island. Now, a lot of what you're about to hear next comes from an incredibly rare source, the official GTA 3 design document, a physical document dated December 29th, 2000, almost a year before the game released, originally distributed to department leads and developers during production. This document was tracked down and purchased on eBay for $1,025 by a YouTube channel called GTA Series Videos, one of the most dedicated GTA research channels on the internet that's been posting Grand Theft Auto content since 2007, pretty much since YouTube's inception. Rather than keeping it to themselves, they shared everything, breaking it all down in a nearly 2-hour-long video. So, a huge thank you to GTA Series Videos. If you want the full deep dive, their video is linked in the description. And what this document reveals about how GTA 3 was originally conceived is quite fascinating. For starters, the original story of GTA 3 was completely different to what we ended up with. The villains weren't the Colombian cartel at all. They were a mysterious, unnamed gang referred to only as the Masks, a shadowy criminal organization with no clear identity. And Claude's story didn't begin with a betrayal by Catalina. He was simply ambushed by the Masks during a heist gone wrong. The personal betrayal angle, the Catalina character, the Colombian cartel, all of that came later in development. Even Claude having no voice wasn't part of the original plan. On page 172 of the design document, Claude actually has written dialogue for 2 specific missions. So a talking Claude was absolutely on the table at some point, but the audio department were already overwhelmed by having to voice dozens of NPCs, along with 9 radio stations and an entire cast of characters. And so a corner that had to be cut ended up becoming one of the most iconic design choices in the series. The list of features that never made it into the final game from this document is also remarkable. GTA 3 was originally going to have split screen screen multiplayer with 5 different game modes: deathmatch, points, races, stunt races, and tag. NPCs called grasses were also planned, civilians who would run to the nearest phone box and report Claude to the police if they spotted him doing something illegal, a feature Rockstar ended up using years later in another one of their games, The Warriors. And then there's Darkle, one of the most mysterious cut characters in the franchise. According to the design document, Darkle was an insane bomb maker who wandered Liberty City and always seemed to have some heinous job for Claude, described as a stinky shuffling prophet of the apocalypse. He was supposed to give Claude 5 missions in total, essentially replacing the kill frenzies from GTA 1 and 2, but his missions kept getting cut one by one until Rockstar pulled him from the game entirely. They addressed him in a 2011 Q&A, confirming he was removed long before any 9/11 related changes, and that despite years of fan speculation, none of his missions involved Russian communists blowing up a school bus or flying planes into buildings. And with the game stripped of everything that couldn't make the cut by mid-2001, it was finally coming together. And in June that same year, Rockstar brought GTA 3 to E3 in Los Angeles, the biggest gaming event in the world.
The original game was based on watching too many American movies and watching all that overhead helicopter chase footage, which was the only camera we could use due to the limitations on the old hardware. But we always wanted to make an action movie when you actually felt like you were controlling a real character. And that's what we've done this time.
But surprisingly, nobody really cared all that much. GTA 3 was mostly overlooked, as all the attention was on Halo, Zelda, and Metal Gear Solid 2. Sam Houser later admitted he was shocked by how little interest the game generated at the event. But rather than deflating the team, it only made them more determined. They went back to Edinburgh and kept polishing, still certain they had something revolutionary on their hands. Then, on the morning of September 11th, 2001, just 6 weeks before GTA 3 was set to release, everything changed. Following the September 11th attacks on the World Trade Center, Rockstar's offices in Manhattan couldn't be accessed for days. And with a game set in a city modelled on New York, filled with crime, violence and satire, weeks away from releasing, Rockstar went back through the game with a fine-tooth comb. A mission referencing terrorists was removed, dialogue was altered, flight paths of planes near buildings were changed, and the police car colours, originally designed to resemble the NYPD's blue and white livery, were switched to black and white. But Rockstar later confirmed the game ended up being only about 1% different as a result of 9/11. The biggest change of all, though, was the cover art. The original GTA 3 cover was deemed too raw for the American market in the immediate aftermath of the attacks, so Rockstar redesigned it in a single evening. Drawing inspiration from the collage style of 1960s movie posters, they created the iconic split panel design we know and love today.
All that as
Sam
wall art,
Houser
right?
said the new cover was instantly
I want every GTA cover to put on my wall. That's what I gotta do to this like streaming space. I need some shit for my wall. Like I got this this vertical monitor, you know, that Samsung shit that goes vertical or horizontal. So I got this kind of like having something in the background, but I need something for these walls. My walls are too plain. So I'd love to have like all the Grand Theft Auto like cover art, excuse me, for my walls. That'd be cool.
over the original, and that design created overnight out of necessity became the signature visual style for the series moving forward. GTA 3 launched on PlayStation 2 on October 22nd, 2001. The same journalists who had barely glanced at it at E3 4 months earlier were now giving it perfect scores. It became the best-selling game of 2001, then the second best-selling game of 2002, beaten only by its own sequel. It sold over 14.5 million copies, and the industry was never the same again. 23 people in a studio in Edinburgh had just changed gaming forever, and DMA Design, the studio that had started life above a chip shop in Dundee, was officially renamed Rockstar North in May 2002, the branch that would go on to become Rockstar's most recognisable studio and redefine what modern open world gaming looks like. Before the dust could even settle from GTA 3's massive success, Rockstar was already working on their next major Grand Theft Auto title, but without even realizing it yet. According to Laszlo Jones, work began on Vice City just 1 month after GTA 3 was released. However, what they were building wasn't intended to be a brand new game at all. That's right, Vice City was originally planned as a mission pack / DLC for GTA 3. Just a short storyline, a new map, some new weapons to have fun with, and a few new vehicles. A quick turnaround to basically capitalize on GTA 3's extraordinary momentum. It was the Hauser brothers in Rockstar New York who had their hearts set on an 80s Miami setting, and Rockstar North just started building it on top of the GTA 3 codebase with no major code changes. Only once Grand Theft Auto 3 kept selling the way it did, and Vice City started looking sufficiently different from what came before it, was the decision made roughly 6 months into development to make it a standalone game. Dan Houser described the inspiration as simply Scarface, Miami Vice, and our 80s childhoods. Throughout development, the team watched Miami Vice constantly as a reference point. Art director Aaron Garbett used the series specifically as a reference for the neon lighting, and in recreating an 80s setting, the team found it relatively painless, given the distinct culture of the era and their personal familiarity with it. But they didn't just watch films and call it a day. The entire development team was packed off on an all-expenses paid research trip to Miami Beach, splitting into small groups, walking the streets, taking photographs and absorbing everything. The architecture, the light, the colours, the way the sun hit the Art Deco buildings on Ocean Drive. Aaron Garbett later said basing the city on Miami made things pretty easy because Miami is just such a visually distinct place. But there was one element of this world they had to get right to nail that 80s Miami Vice atmosphere, which is the music. Every GTA before this relied almost entirely on original compositions, avoiding the cost and legal complexity of licensing real tracks. Grand Theft Auto 3 had dipped its toe in, but Vice City was a completely different scale entirely because of the atmosphere they were trying to sell. You can't sit there in a studio and manufacture something even remotely close to Billie Jean or Out of Touch or I Ran. The era had a sound that was completely unique and inimitable, and if this game was going to transport people there, it needed the actual thing. So, Rockstar went ahead and got it. Over 100 fully licensed songs spread across multiple radio stations covering every genre the decade had to offer. Pop, metal, hip-hop, new wave, R&B, Michael Jackson on the same soundtrack as Megadeth, Tears for Fears next to Herbie Hancock. It was an enormous undertaking, a massive financial investment, and a licensing operation the studio had never attempted at anything close to this scale. And pulling it off came down to who was actually running Rockstar. Before co-founding the company, Sam Houser had spent years working at BMG, one of the biggest music labels in the world. He knew how record labels operated, he knew the industry, he knew the people, and he knew who to call, and he leveraged every one of those connections to make it happen. The result was a soundtrack so carefully curated it didn't feel like a playlist, it felt like a time machine. Every station was a different entry point into 1986 Miami, and for an entire generation of players, many of whom weren't even born in the 80s, Vice City was their first introduction to half of these songs. However, all of that music came with a catch nobody talked about at the time. Licenses expire, and years later when Rockstar tried to re-release the game digitally, songs started vanishing one by one as deals ran out, including multiple Michael Jackson tracks. The version of Vice City that millions of people grew up with, the complete version, technically no longer exists in any official release. But the world was only half of it. If Vice City was truly going to be brought to life, it needed a worthy cast.
San Andreas was the one, though.
Rockstar deliver.
You try this at home sometime. This shit is hardcore. You know, but you gotta see, once they put this shit together, it's gonna be what they say, off the hook.
For $320, give him a stick. I mean, shit, let him. I'll take an ass whipping for $320.
I stick my neck out for nobody.
Yeah. This is a disaster. We are so screwed, man. I was in it.
That was perfect.
I was in it.
That was excellent.
It felt so good.
It's so funny that the only thing that I'd ever do, and it's this.
Yeah.
You know, the most nastiest thing ever.
Funny old guy recently, right? Don't take it personally, my dear.
Look.
So cool seeing this behind the scenes shit like this.
L-U-C-K-Y.
Gary Busey. It's crazy.
Correct knowledge yearly.
What Rockstar had quietly
Lawrence
said
Taylor, I didn't
was
know he was in the game
elite-level
LT.
Hollywood
That's
cast,
crazy.
the kind you'd expect to see on a film poster outside a movie theater, not a silly
that shit
PlayStation 2
big,
video game.
big.
Ray Liotta, the star of Goodfellas as Tommy Vercetti, the first fully voiced protagonist in the history of the franchise. William Fichtner as Ken Rosenberg, Luis Guzman as Ricardo Diaz, Burt Reynolds as Avery Carrington, Fairuza Balk as Mercedes Cortez, Danny Dyer as Kent Paul, Gary Busey as Phil Cassidy, and Philip Michael Thomas, the actual Ricardo Tubbs from Miami Vice itself, as Lance Vance. And the list goes on. It was jaw-dropping. But as you can imagine, when you're dealing with that many Hollywood egos in one project, things were never going to go entirely smoothly behind the scenes. And let's just say, not everyone on that list was a pleasure to work with. Dan Houser later recalled that during one recording session, he and Burt Reynolds got into a heated argument over the direction of a scene. It escalated to the point where Burt reportedly turned to the room and yelled, "Get the limey out of here." The sessions were so hostile that Dan Houser apparently considered cutting him from the game entirely. But Rockstar never forgot about it. Years later, when they brought Burt Reynolds' character Avery Carrington back in Liberty City Stories, they killed him off immediately, had his body eaten by another character, and revealed mid-scene that he'd been wearing a wig the entire time. A petty, perfect act of revenge buried inside a PSP spin-off. Classic Rockstar at the time. Then there was Ray Liotta, who director of production
That's shady as fuck.
described as frequently difficult on
That's shady as fuck. They killed Burt Reynolds and said that nigga was wearing a toupee. Hey man, I love this shit, dog.
set. Sam Houser later said that in some sessions he was into it, but then sometimes he was very cold and couldn't work. Ray Liotta himself later admitted he'd done the game purely for the money, and after feeling he'd been underpaid when Rockstar came back asking for a cameo in San Andreas, he said no, making GTA Vice City the only game he ever appeared in, which in hindsight only adds to the legend of it. However, it was these experiences that made Rockstar rethink their approach to celebrity casting. They'd still go big on San Andreas, but never quite at the same caliber as Vice City. Over a decade later, Dan Houser eventually put it plainly, stating, "We don't bring in name actors anymore because of their egos. But for one game built in 9 months, Rockstar had created something that transcended the medium, and the numbers reflected it." Grand Theft Auto Vice City launched on October 29th, 2002. It sold 500,000 copies within the first 24 hours, and 1.4 million in its first 3 days, making it the fastest selling game in history at the time. It went on to sell 17.5 million copies in total, outselling GTA 3 and becoming the best-selling game of 2002. 2 games in 2 years, both the best-selling titles on the planet back to back. But Rockstar wasn't even close to being finished, because even as Vice City was flying off shelves, Rockstar North were already building something bigger, something that would take everything Vice City had done and blow the roof off it entirely.
Still, this is a thriving industry, violent video games, selling more than $6 billion in software just last year.
Hi, Anthony Sullivan here with a great new invention that'll change your life. No more boring conversations or dull evenings. No more envy at other people's happy, successful lives. All this from one amazing product, Grand Theft Auto Vice City.
After Vice City became a worldwide phenomenon, Rockstar had a target on their back. By 2003, the video games are dangerous conversation in America had reached fever pitch. Congress was holding hearings, parent groups were organizing, and news networks were running segment after segment about the corrupting influence of violent video games on children. And sitting right at the center of all of it, the most controversial name in the entire industry was Rockstar Games. And leading the charge was an American activist called Jack Thompson, a Florida attorney who had made it his personal mission to bring Rockstar down. Jack Thompson had spent years targeting violent media such as rap music, films and television, but GTA was his obsession. He began targeting the franchise in early 2003, attempting to insert himself into a murder case in Ohio, arguing that GTA 3 had essentially trained the teenage killer to commit the crime. The defense strategy was so absurd that the perpetrator himself ultimately rejected Thompson's help, firing him from the case entirely, but that didn't stop him on his witch hunt. Just a few months later, in June 2003, when an 18-year-old named Devin Moore walked into a police station in Alabama, grabbed an officer's gun and killed 3 people, then calmly told authorities, "Life is like a video game." Jack Thompson immediately pointed the finger at Vice City. He called the game a murder simulator on national television, and went on cable news making unsubstantiated claims about what players could do in the game. He even personally videotaped Miami Best Buy selling a copy of Vice City to a child, then sent a letter to the company's headquarters warning of prosecutions if they didn't stop. He was a relentless Karen, yet the more coverage he got, the more games Rockstar sold. Cuban and Haitian American communities in Florida had also taken serious issue with how their communities were portrayed in the game, and specifically with a mission objective that literally appeared on screen reading, "Kill the Haitians." Protests were organized in Florida, and the story ended up hitting national news, and by late 2003, a full year after the game had launched, Rockstar issued a public apology and committed to releasing a censored version of Vice City in 2004 with that dialogue removed entirely. It was the first time Rockstar had ever been made to go back and change a released game, and it wouldn't be the last. From the very beginning, San Andreas was built differently. It was obvious that Vice City hadn't innovated that much, and another reskin wasn't going to fly, in technical director Obi Vermai's own words. So this time they had 2 whole years of development, more than double what Vice City had received. And the difference would show. Instead of 1 city, this time they were going for 3. 1 based on Los Angeles, 1 based on San Francisco, and 1 based on Las Vegas. Although the original plan was actually 3 separate maps, connected only by trains and planes, similar to how the first GTA games worked. But in a meeting that Obi Vermai later said publicly he still has nightmares about, the room was apparently split. 3 people wanted separate maps, but 2 didn't. Obi went home that night genuinely convinced they were about to make a massive mistake. However, the next morning, Leslie Benzies walked back into the room with his mind made up. 1 map, 3 cities, all connected. And when Leslie Benzies had a strong opinion on something, that was just what they did. But building 3 cities across 1 enormous connected map on PS2 hardware was only half the challenge. Because San Andreas wasn't just going to be bigger than anything Rockstar had built before. It was going to feel completely different to anything they'd ever made. San Andreas was set in early 90s LA when gang culture was at its peak. The crack epidemic was tearing communities apart, and the Rodney King riots had just set the city on fire. This was raw, and for a studio full of developers from Edinburgh, Scotland, they were going to need help from someone who actually knew this world, someone who lived it. Enter DJ Pooh, a legendary West Coast hip-hop producer who had co-written Friday alongside Ice Cube. DJ Pooh came on board as a creative consultant and co-writer. He took the team around Los Angeles himself, drove Scottish developers through South Central, through Compton, through the actual neighbourhoods that CJ's world was built on, showing them the blocks, the people, the gangs and the culture. For a group of developers from Edinburgh, it was like landing on another planet. Sam Houser later recalled being both fascinated yet terrified by what they encountered during that research. But DJ Pooh's contributions didn't stop there, because it was also Pooh who found the voice of CJ. Young Melee, a Los Angeles rapper and close friend of DJ Pooh's, didn't even know he was on Rockstar's radar. Pooh called him up for what seemed like a completely normal conversation about music. What Melee didn't know was that the call was on speakerphone and Rockstar were listening in the whole time. They heard his voice, his natural LA delivery, and liked what they heard enough to bring him in for a proper audition.
When he hung up, he called me back like 15 minutes later, and he was like, "Hey man, I was in the meeting with Rockstar Games, and I didn't want to tell you because I didn't want you to put too much on it or not enough. I wanted you to be Melee."
But when Melee actually pulled up to the studio on the day, there was a massive line wrapped around the building. Rockstar had cast a wide net, and every candidate was given the same thing to read: a scene from Menace to Society, specifically the iconic drive-through carjacking burger scene.
You know what I mean? So I'm on there doing my thing, and he said, "Dude, like, you know, you're really good. You had me like actually scared. You know, it's so authentic."
Rockstar liked him so much they called him in to read again a short while after the first audition, narrowed down the candidates some more, and eventually he got the final call from Rockstar asking if he could come to their headquarters in New York.
"Would you be, you know, able to come to New York in 2 weeks?" I said, "Hell yeah. Yeah, I mean, I'll start walking right now."
And when he arrived in New York and got into the recording booth, the scale of what he'd taken on became very
about to switch
real,
over
very
to
fast. Melee
TikTok
described the script as
soon.
being thicker than 2 Bibles. Almost every line had to be recorded multiple times in different states of CJ's health. A thinner voice for when he was lean, and a heavier delivery for when he'd get bigger due to the brand new muscle and weight system. And just like DJ Pooh had done on the streets of LA, Melee made sure the dialogue came out as real as possible. possible. He corrected slang throughout the script, making sure every line CJ delivered actually reflected how people spoke on the streets of early 90s Los Angeles. And despite all the headaches that came with Vice City's Hollywood cast, it had also proven that the right voices could elevate a game to something else entirely. So for San Andreas, they put together another that was seriously impressive. Fewer big names than Vice City, but the ones they got were perfectly placed. Samuel L. Jackson as corrupt cop Frank Tenpenny, the biggest villain of the game who became the most iconic antagonist of the entire franchise. Chris Penn as his ruthless partner Eddie Pulaski, Ice-T as rap mogul Mad Dog, Charlie Murphy as Jizzy B, David Cross as Zero, James Woods as the mysterious government agent Mike Torino, Peter Fonda as the Truth,
Fucking
aging
iconic,
hippie conspiracy theorist who becomes one of
shit's
CJ's
crazy.
most unlikely allies, and William Fichtner returning from Vice City as Ken Rosenberg. But unlike the chaotic sprint of Vice City, the production this time around was relatively smooth. Grand Theft Auto 3 was built by just 23 people, Vice City by a similarly small team under enormous pressure. But for San Andreas, Rockstar had grown significantly, bringing over the entire team from Manhunt after that game wrapped, swelling the development team to around 80 people by the time the game was released, the biggest Rockstar North had ever gotten up until that point. But while this expanded army of developers meant more hands on deck, Leslie Benzie's mandate for a single seamless map meant the programming team in Edinburgh was about to face a brutal battle with the PlayStation 2 hardware, a machine that was already 4 years old with just 32 megabytes of RAM to work with. GTA 3 was 8.12 kilometers squared, Vice City was 9.11 kilometers squared, but San Andreas was 38.2 kilometers squared, more than double the size of both previous games combined. And they were doing all of that on the exact same hardware those first two 3D games were made on, while it was also rumoured both before and after release, and even till this day, that San Andreas used a dual-layer DVD disc capable of holding double the storage of a standard disc. They actually managed to cram the entire game onto a standard single-layer disc, coming in at around 4.5 gigabytes on PS2 and 4.7 gigabytes on PC. So, how did they actually pull it off? Well, firstly, the streaming system had to be completely rebuilt from the ground up and pushed beyond its limits. In GTA 3 and Vice City, the map was split into islands separated by long bridges and water channels. The engine relied on these pathways as choke points to artificially slow the player down, giving the PS2 enough time to load the next area. If you crossed those borders too quickly, the engine simply couldn't keep up, completely shattering your immersion with a sudden loading screen mid-drive. But for San Andreas, Rockstar redesigned the system to use a far more aggressive form of streaming because the map had to run as a seamless, singular, massive landmass. Instead of waiting for structural boundaries to clear memory, the new engine maintained a dynamic, high-speed bubble around the player. It constantly pulled in assets directly ahead of your path, while aggressively purging everything that slipped out of your radius the absolute second it was deemed no longer needed. While this real-time world streaming technique successfully eliminated mid-game loading screens altogether, stretching it across a map 4 times the size of Vice City meant playing a dangerous game with the console's limitations, and the cracks showed in ways players encountered daily, such as your jet exploding into a radio tower, tree, or a telephone pole that the game hadn't even rendered on screen yet. Basically, the game would load an object's collision, its physical presence in the world, before it had time to actually draw them on screen. They also had to deliberately add extra air resistance onto vehicles in certain parts of the map in order to slow players down, just to give the streaming system enough time to load the world ahead. And thanks to a fellow GTA YouTuber called TJGM, who mapped every single hidden speed zone across the entire state, we can actually see where Rockstar put them. They're located in the most asset-heavy areas of the map where the engine was under the most strain, and in places where the player could build up enough speed to outrun the streaming system, such as freeways and bridges. However, despite all of the technical limitations, the magicians at Rockstar North did what they always did. They found a way, and delivered something that nobody in the industry was quite ready for. Grand Theft Auto San Andreas launched on October 26, 2004. The reviews were immediate and unanimous, with perfect scores across the board. It became the fastest selling PlayStation 2 game in history, and it went on to sell 17.3 million copies on the PS2 alone and 27.5 million across all platforms, making it not just the best-selling game of 2004, but the best-selling PlayStation 2 game of all time, a record it still holds to this day. But Rockstar's time in the limelight was about to turn into a nightmare. Barely 8 months after launch, a Dutch programmer dug into the game's code and uncovered a secret Rockstar thought they had safely locked away forever, and its discovery would trigger a mainstream media meltdown that nearly destroyed the entire company, becoming the biggest and most expensive controversy in Rockstar's history, and one of the most infamous in the gaming space as a whole.
How about a little coffee?
All right, let's have us some coffee.
During development, Rockstar had built a very explicit mini-game into San Andreas, one where CJ could take a girlfriend home and the camera would cut inside, and an interactive sequence would play out that went far beyond anything considered acceptable in mainstream gaming. Late in development, the decision was made to pull it, but rather than removing the code entirely, Rockstar simply disabled and buried it, confident nobody would ever find it. However, on June 9th, 2005, just 2 days after San Andreas landed on PC, a Dutch modder named Patrick Wildenborg uploaded a single file to GTAgarage.com named Hot Coffee. The file size was tiny, only around 1.23 megabytes, since all the mod did was edit a tiny bit of code, basically like flipping a switch to unlock the content that was already in the game. Within days of the mod being uploaded, videos began circulating around the internet, and from there it didn't take long to reach the mainstream news. And when it did, the reaction was exactly what you'd expect. Jack Thompson, who had spent years trying to burn Rockstar to the ground, finally had the ammunition he'd been looking for. He went on every network that would have him, calling it proof of a deliberate conspiracy to expose children to corn. And infamously, Hillary Clinton, then a US senator, grabbed the political spotlight. She officially petitioned the FTC, or Federal Trade Commission, to investigate whether Rockstar Games had deceived the public and violated rating disclosures, while also demanding new laws to regulate video games and protect the American youth from what she called a silent epidemic. Rockstar's initial response only made things worse, releasing a statement blaming hackers and modders for creating the explicit content themselves. But that defense instantly crumbled. Since the mod was only 1 megabyte, it proved the massive graphic files and animations were already sitting on millions of retail discs worldwide. Within weeks, Hillary Clinton successfully pressured the Entertainment Software Rating Board to change the game's rating from M for mature to AO for adults only. And in the retail world, an adults only rating was the kiss of death. Major retail giants like Walmart, Target and Best Buy were forced to pull the game from their shelves, and Rockstar had no choice but to immediately halt production, recall millions of copies and patch out the hidden code in order to get it back on store shelves. The financial damage was astronomical. Rockstar's parent company, Take-Two Interactive, lost over $20 million in recalled inventory and legal fees, and they eventually had to settle a class action lawsuit from angry consumers for another $20 million. Even worse, Hillary Clinton's petition successfully forced the FTC into action, hitting the company with a federal investigation that put their business practices under a microscope for years. The wild, untamed era of Rockstar Games being an untouchable industry rebel was effectively over, forcing the company into an era of strict corporate secrecy.
All that for nothing. And shit, in GTA 5, you can have sex in the car, get hit, and all that shit. Like, all that for nothing.
But with the wounds from one of the biggest scandals in gaming history still fresh, the team at Rockstar North found themselves facing a completely new challenge. The PlayStation 2 era was drawing to a close, and a new generation of hardware was arriving with the Xbox 360 and PlayStation 3. Rockstar had always been about pushing the boundaries and redefining what a video game could be, and this time around would be no different, because what was coming next would shake the industry all over again, and nobody saw it coming. Production on Grand Theft Auto 4 began roughly a month after San Andreas was released. Rockstar knew immediately the series needed to transition into the high-definition era, and committed to transitioning GTA into the HD universe from day one.
Alright, I'm gonna switch the rest of this to TikTok. I gotta get some TikTok time. They come in and stream a little more. People trickling in. Due to how TikTok work, you get a little more action. So I'm gonna switch over, watch the second half on TikTok. At Stoic Suffering on TikTok. Well, it might be Stoic Suffering 3D, but you'll see if you want to come over and check it out with me. I'm gonna fuck with y'all.